All right, you ready? Cool, let's do it. What's up, guys? Marcellus Williams, a.k.a. TheSwolefessor, education on health, fitness, social well-being. I'm here with my fellow YouTubers, coaches, friends, Sean Noriega and Jonnie Candito. And today we're going to be doing a roundtable discussion Q&A. Pretty much both Sean and I got on our stories, asked you guys to ask us some questions, and we're going to answer those questions. I'm really looking forward to this. I love talking with these guys just about fitness and non-fitness related things as well. Yeah, we're just going to dive right into it. Sean, do you want to start with some of the ones that you got?
Absolutely. Let's get to it. All right, ladies and gentlemen, our first question of the day is, what is the first variable you change for a lifter when a lift is not progressing? Do you guys want to take charge? I could take charge.
Yeah, go ahead and start us off, man.
All right.
Start us off.
So the answer that I have for this is, and it depends, but I'm going to expand upon this. So when it comes to whether or not a lifter is progressing, there are a couple of things that I'm going to look at. And I have what I would kind of call like a fatigue fitness flow chart. Basically, a lifter could be not progressing for a multitude of reasons, right? And ultimately, if we group them into very vague categories, it could be a result of doing too little or doing too much. And what I'm going to do in conjunction with actually looking at the program is get feedback from the lifter. So there are a multitude of variables that we can change here, right? We can change the amount of total volume a lifter is doing, the frequency a lifter is doing, the variations that they're doing, or even the rep ranges that they're working in. So there are a couple different scenarios that we could see here where if a lifter is experiencing decreased performance, as evidenced by the question, saying that you're not progressing anymore, in conjunction with feelings of like soreness, general fatigue, trouble sleeping, losing weight, things associated with being overstressed, then for me, that would tell me, okay, this lifter is performing too much volume. Now, the metrics or the variables that we can change to address volume could be, the per set or per day, set count for a given lift. If we have gone to a point in frequency that we believe to maybe be too aggressive, for example, if a lifter has squatted 2 days a week and we've upped it to 3 days a week, we might realize that this could be a frequency that is outside of their realm of management at that point in time, where we can pull back frequency as a mean to reduce volume. Now, on the flip side of things, if we are experiencing a reduction in performance or lack of progression, and a lifter is feeling overly fresh, but the movement pattern is feeling clunky or foreign, that might be a sign to us that the frequency or the volume is too low. If a lifter is performing a frequency that is feasible, for example, if you are squatting 3 days a week and you're experiencing this, I'm probably not going to bump you up to 4 days a week of squatting, but it is probable that if you are experiencing that while being a 3-time-a-week squatter, you might need to do more overall work, right? The volume, dose-response relationship of volume is definitely very linear up into a point. So if we're experiencing the feeling of, oh, I'm recovering, I'm crushing things, but like performance isn't going up, we might need to increase more there. I'm getting a little rambly here, so the things that I have not addressed yet, I would love to hear from both of these guys because I know that they have different systematic approaches in terms of and maybe the order in addressing some of these things. So I'll pass it down the line to Marcellus here.
Yeah, so first of all, I completely agree with what Sean is saying in terms of you have to look at the total volume dosage across the board as well as get that feedback from the lifter, right? Because sometimes it may not even be anything necessarily related to the program. It could just be outside stressors, right? So it's like, okay, are we eating enough? Are we sleeping enough? And if we aren't on top of those things first, I always like to address those outside factors before changing the programming, especially if it seems like the programming was working well up to a point until suddenly, my workload went up, my hours at work changed, things of that nature. And of course, if it's a situation where, hey, you can't help it, you have to work this many hours, then you can start adjusting the programming. And my mentality is always to try to make the smallest changes first. So like with what Sean said, where let's say you have someone who's squatting, maybe 2 times a week, right? Before I would even go to 3 times a week, I would maybe just increase the volume a little bit on those 2 days first if I think it's the fact that they're not doing enough before going into a third day. Then, of course, if it gets to the point where, okay, we do need more volume, but we already kind of pushing the threshold of what we can do on these 2 days, that's when I probably introduce that third day coming in from there. So I'm very much big on the idea of okay, make the smallest changes first, as well as make one change at a time. I absolutely hate when I see like a lifter be like, oh, hey, this isn't working, so I'm going to take this out, I'm going to add this in, I'm going to switch this variation. Because then even if you do get things clicking again, you don't know why. So I think making the smallest possible changes that you can first when it comes to like, the volume, the frequency, and then even looking at things like rep ranges, right? Like changing up how the volume is broken down. Maybe instead of doing like, 3x5, maybe try like a 5x3. I know for myself and, other clients, that's something that makes a big difference. Like I just respond better to doing like, a 5x3, even with the load being the same versus 3x5. Just the quality of my sets and reps is better, and I get much better progress from that. So in conjunction with everything that Sean's saying, it's like, even though there's a lot, right, that he went into, you don't have to try to change all those things at once. Start with the simplest measure first, adjust that, give it a couple weeks, see how you respond, and then keep going from there.
Scientific method, brother.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it, yeah.
Yeah, so extending off of that, I completely agree with everything Marcel's just said. I would say my specific hierarchy is first barbell variance, like we said, with volume equated, which is the smallest change in my opinion. And specifically for myself, usually I have a rotation of 3 exercises that are kind of the primary barbell variant. And I think that helps avoid just programming random things for the sake of it.
Yeah.
So if every third cycle, and ultimately that's a very big space of time in between each. And then if one is not working out so well, change that first. Then if it becomes a trend more broadly, I think that's when I go from barbell variant to rep range to volume to frequency. So the absolute last thing that I would change is frequency, because I think that changes so much of someone's schedule. Like you said, like that's really fundamental. And the reason why I think it is important not to go to volume too quickly is we know it works. And sometimes when you know something works, you're not really finding out exactly what is the problem and as narrow of identification as possible. And if you have many problems going on at once, and like we said, you solve the problem with volume, you might not really know the problem, and then you're basically masking it. So I definitely completely agree with what all of them are saying. And I would say, like I said, it's really tricky as a coach and as a lifter yourself to say, maybe I could solve this quicker, but if I can get this person to add 5 to 10 pounds to their max just by swapping out a high bar squat with a low bar pause squat, because especially, we'll give a specific example, someone has it really low on their back. Like a lot of times, especially lighter females, for example, they're more likely not going to see the same carryover from high bar.
Sure.
And if you could switch that over immediately and get a positive effect, then you can save going from 3x5 to a 4x5 on their peak volume, and now you have that in your back pocket.
Yeah. And there's so many different ways you can address volume too. Like you said, the barbell variance, the concept-specific work. Maybe you just add in an extra day of belt squats or something like that just to get that extra work in. Because I've even had times where I haven't changed many variables with the concept-specific lifts. I was like, okay, well, let's add a little bit more belt squat volume here, and that gives us that stimulus we need. Or, hey, let's actually pull back a little bit on the accessories, and then I don't have to change any of this at all. Yeah. And that works out well, too.
And one thing I want to add is when we talk about rep ranges, I think it is, especially with kind of more my audience side of things, I think a lot of people would interpret that as changing volume in and of itself.
Yeah.
I think it is really critical to say, like, you can really train with adequate volume for hypertrophy on the comp lift with 5x4 type days, 6x4, 10x3.
Yeah.
So first, if you find 8s do not help your squat at all, go from a 3x8 to a 5x4. Don't go from a 3x8 to 3x4 or 4x3.
Yeah.
And I do think a lot of people make that mistake. They see a positive effect, but that's just from the artificial taper.
Yeah, exactly. Like I said, myself, for example, like I just changed it from a 3x5 to a 5x3. Still same total workload being done.
Yeah, and on the flip side of that, as somebody who is very biased toward, because of my own personal experience toward high reps, I think that especially, obviously this is Marcellus's channel, but for a lot of the people watching this from Johnny's audience, I think that a lot of the the textbook knowledge of strength training would lead you to believe that if we want to get stronger at the 1RM, specificity is the most important thing. But on the other side of the spectrum of what Johnny just said, there really are people who have rep range sensitivities on certain lifts where high rep, for a period of time, maybe longer than would be deemed acceptable in the triphasic model of training. Those high reps might actually move your top end strength. For me personally, my deadlift is a lift that I really tolerate very, very little intensity, and most of my volume is in the 7s, rep range of 7 and higher. And that's something I'll carry all the way through to the meet, and I see the best results with that. So,
when you say through to the meet, how close to the meet?
So I literally, my last deadlift session, aside from, the week of, I'll usually just take like a couple singles with like a last warm up. But literally the week before the meet, I am doing like 8s on one day, for example, and 10s or 9s on the second day. So it is literally like not even, an undulating periodization. It is literally like high reps all the way to the meet. And I would say most people don't fall into that category. Most people cluster, toward the middle of the bell curve. But, that is something to consider, because a hypothetical scenario that we could have here is you might have a lifter who is feeling like actual signs of being beat up, but when you look at their historical training, it doesn't really seem like they're doing more than what they have in the past. And in fact, maybe you're doing less. And that's an experience that I had during periods of time where I was training lower rep on deadlift. Even if I counted the total number of weekly reps and the tonnage, it was lower than when I was training high rep, but physically I felt as if I was overtraining. Yeah. So it's really like when you're training on one side of the spectrum where the percentage is really low, you're moving so much differently, even though you're doing the same movement, moving so much differently than you might be doing doubles or triples, where like the fatigue per rep is a little bit different because the movement does change.
Yeah.
So,
and I mean, that's why, kind of to close that question off, that's why I think all of us on our channels encourage, like, hey, keep track of your past sheets, your data, follow those trends. Like, because at the end of the day, regardless of what might be good on paper or textbook, if you notice a certain trend with yourself, regardless if 10 other people are doing it or no one else is doing it, it would be very wise of you to follow that, because it's giving you the results you want. And if you've noticed that anytime you shift or change this even a little bit, that your performance goes down, just stop screwing with it. Like it really is that simple.
Yeah.
Cool. Exactly.
Awesome. So I actually have a question that I think segues, we segue nicely into this question as a result of the last one, because somebody asked us on each of your lifts, so on your squat, on your bench press, on your deadlift, can you recall your best taper and meet performance on each of those lifts? And I think each of us have very unique situations where, everybody has an idea in their head who maybe has competed before or has self-coached of like a formulaic way you're supposed to taper, but oftentimes that's, not always going to be what you do. So I guess I'll start.
Yeah.
So I actually I'll try to do this very simply. I already alluded to this with deadlift. This meet that I did with my coach, Steve Denovi, it was our first prep together. I have seen, especially in my past meet, that sticking to my guns and really believing that high rep deadlifting would work, that it turned out really favorably. The last meet I did in July 2020, I pulled 716 pounds, which was a 7.5 kilo meet PR for me. And during this prep that I did with Steve, he trusted that was a real experience that I had. And in the same way, we really kept volume pretty static, even in that last week before the meet, where, you would be thinking you'd be doing doubles, triples, just lower rep ranges in general, and maybe even bringing the total weekly volume down. It stayed pretty static, where I literally had, a single, a set of 5, 3 sets of 8 on day 1, and then like literally pause sets of 10 on day 2. And then the week of the meet, I kind of slashed it all off, took my last warm-up for a couple singles on that day 1, which was a Wednesday, competed on a Saturday, and pulled a very, very comfortable 727 pounds on deadlift. So that is definitely a strategy that we are going to implement going forward. Now, with bench press, I would definitely say that this meet, despite not making my third attempt, was also probably the best bench performance that I've had in terms of just strength output. And the reason for that is with my bench press, when, historically I've benched 5 days a week, even sometimes 6 days a week, the more frequently you bench, the more difficult it is to break the fatigue patterns that arise, meaning what days are your strong days, what days are your weak days. If you're a deadlifter who deadlifts once a week, you could probably, not even have to deadlift on the day of the week you compete and be fine with a taper. But with something like a bench press where you're doing 5 days a week, even 6 times a week, you're doing it so frequently that your recovery pattern, like your recovery week, essentially gets condensed, where now you're seeing multiple patterns within 1 week. So it really was important for me to line up my training in such a way that Saturday always felt like the strongest day. And what we did was followed kind of like an emerging strategies time to peak model with my bench press, where we reset the training block at a 6 week out mark, because we realized that if we kept a microcycle for X number of weeks and just progressed the RPE, that my bench press would peak on that 6th week. So we didn't taper at all the week of the meet. We literally kept every variable exactly the same. The variations, the rep ranges, the total set count, everything was exactly the same, and just trusted that, okay, we see a great performance on the Saturday, this sixth one is going to be the best one. And I truly felt that way, given that there were some days, even on a rogue fat pad, where 220 felt like a difficult bench, and 218.5 was, obviously I didn't hit it, but to do it on a non-fat pad and actually have the potential to hit it, clearly indicates that there was not a significant strength disparity, which to me tells me that we did a good job with bench. Be really quick with squat here. I have definitely experienced this past meet a not great squat peak, and I believe that's because we pulled volume too early. If you kind of get the gist of how things go for me here, I'm definitely like a late peaker where I can't, at least on meet day, I don't respond well to a stepwise taper or even a linear one where, I'm gradually pulling away stress. I do really well with kind of riding out with a certain amount of stress and just slashing it, as last minute as possible. My best meet that I've ever done on squat was the 2019 Arnold, where I squatted 650 pounds. And my rep ranges stayed pretty high, all block. I think a week out I had like 5 sets of 7 on my day 1 squat and like 6 or 7 sets of 4 after a top single on my day 2. Where the week before, I think that was actually my peak volume for the block if you're doing both tonnage and number of working sets. And then the week of the meet, it was a very, very similar to deadlift, just a drastic slash, and that's where I squatted 650. This time around, we reduced volume 2 weeks out, and then I think by the time I got to meet day, I was pretty flat and only hit 628 despite hitting, a very submaximal 639 in training. So a lot of different ways to skin a cat, and for me, I've noticed, even though we do things differently for each lift, there's kind of this like, pervading trend for me that I have to really kind of keep things in longer than most people would.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I'm like the exact opposite of Sean when it comes to a lot of it, but like especially with the deadlift. Those of you who've been with the channel know that for me, in my entire last prep, I drastically got rid of a lot of deadlift volume. I pretty much on my primary deadlift day only worked up to my top set, like my top single, and had no back down volume at all whatsoever. Like, I would make up for it with belt squats and stuff like that, but did not have any type of deadlift volume from the floor except for my top set. And then on my secondary day was running just RDLs all the way up until about 3 weeks out from the meet. Then went from RDLs to some very light percentage-based pulls from the floor on that secondary day, really just to get a little bit more refinement with the movement. And it literally started around like 60% at about like 4 weeks out. It'd be like a 5x3. Then 2 weeks out, it'd be about 62%. It would turn to like a 4x3, then a 3x2, and then a 3x1. And that's just something that I've always done with my deadlifts in general. And even with the huge reduction in deadlift volume, it worked out great for me. The heaviest I pulled in that entire prep was 589, and I pulled 617 at the meet. So I know that for me, and we kept the intensity pretty high. Like usually, like the final block going into a meet, I might either work up to about like an RPE 8 or an RPE 9. Like, so usually if I'm going up to an RPE 8, that would be about the heaviest I hit. Or if I hit a 9, it's because I hit like a 7 to 7.5 the week before. But we did something a little bit different this time where Brad had me hit an 8 at the 3 week out mark and then a 9 at the 2 week out mark. And then, of course, when we're 1 week out, I end up hitting like 6 to 7 on both squat, deadlift, and like about 7 to 8 on bench. But what we found is, because I've always known I had a really good response to intensity, was that I actually got just a really huge boost from doing that compared to only hitting it like once. And I was a little worried about it at first because usually after hitting that RPA, I'm thinking, man, if I come in here, I think I'm going to feel kind of wrecked. But my RP 9 felt fantastic. And then at the 1 week out mark, of course, since I'm recovering from 2 weeks of pushing the intensity more, the 7s didn't feel fantastic, but they moved in a way that I know, like, okay, my deadlift is good to go. So for me, my deadlift pretty much just thrives on keeping my intensity at a certain level, like throughout. And then when I get closer to a meet, just getting in a little bit of that additional practice and technically adding in a little bit more volume, pulling from the floor. And then, of course, when we're 1 week out, pulling that away and then just letting the deadlift really show up and shine. As for my bench press, so in the past, what we've done with my bench is very slight reductions, kind of similar to what you're talking about, Sean, very slight changes as far as like overall volume, stuff like that. I'm still constantly touching like heavy loads. Even at that 1 week out mark, I'll touch like an RP 8 on bench just because keeping those heavier loads in my hands, especially that long range of motion, is good for me. And then we might get a little bit of tapering throughout the week. But this time around, we actually reduced things a little bit more drastically. And part of it was due to kind of like just trying to make sure my shoulders stayed healthy because I was dealing with stuff as far as that. So at the 1 week out mark, my bench volume was the same as always has been because I don't really reduce anything at the 1 week out mark. And I bench 4 times a week. And then on the secondary day, same thing. I had like a long pause single to get, because that secondary volume day becomes more like a secondary intensity day, getting closer to the meet. But then on days 3 and 4, we drastically cut back intensity and volume. So instead of having like, a usual 3x7 on that third day, it was like a 3x4. And then on the fourth day, I literally just did like 2 sets of 5, like an RP5. And my bench felt freaking fantastic on the meet day. Even though I did, same thing, Sean, even though I didn't get my third bench, it was easily the strongest that it had felt in months. And I think for me, it's just the fact that because I have such a long range of motion that I drive through, that reducing the volume and kind of just getting some more of that fatigue off, but also kind of taking a little bit of a break from the heavier load those last few days going into it, just makes me feel really strong and powerful the day of when it comes to my bench press. And that's something that I've noticed like with a lot of my clients as well, where when they have the closer grip and they push that longer range of motion, being a little bit more aggressive with the taper compared to what a lot of coaches recommend with bench actually has the bench feeling really good the day of. And then as for my squat, squat was a little bit different this time around too, as far as usually the way I go about it is I'll have 2 like comp squat days and then 1 variation, whether it's SSB or high bar, and we ran that all the way into the meet until we were 1 week out. Then it was like 3 comp squat days. But funnily enough, this was like the least reduction I ever had in my squat volume. So 1 week out, I was still squatting the same way that I was 2 weeks out. The secondary day, what I would usually do for SSB volume, we just changed it to comp squat specific volume. And then my tertiary day was just the same percentage work that it always had been. So I actually made, funnily enough, compared to what I usually do, the least amount of volume changes to my squat going into the meet. And I finally squatted 500 at a meet. So that's something that we found for me too, is that because at this point my squat volume never gets crazy high anyway, and I make up so much of it with like belt squats and accessory stuff like that, we make more slight adjustments to that, keep the squat specificity pretty consistent, and everything showed up really well for me at this past meet.
And just to interject, just to give a little more insight that I'm sure Marcellus would agree with here, since he mentioned his squat, while we, like Jonnie said earlier, don't want to just have variation cycled through just for the sake of it. On the flip side of that, as Marcellus mentioned, like the SSB squatting was very favorable and transferred over very well to his squat. And I think that what a lot of times happens, going back to that idea of like following the book of periodization, like people get cold feet when it comes to like keeping a variation in or a movement in that's not comp specific. But if we see transference that's continued to lead to progress, like in the same way that we don't want to put variations in just for the sake of it, it's like if something is really driving the top end on your actual competition movement, like if you got to keep it in, keep it in. Maybe the last couple weeks, like Marcellus had mentioned, you reintroduce the squat just for the sake of specificity in a way that there's not enough time for it to really change how fatigue enters. But I mean that's a super valuable strategy to consider. I've literally had lifters where I've kept a variation all the way through to the meet. Particularly like a female lifter where I've literally had her doing like a beltless pause deadlift on like the session that's 3 days before her meet, and then just PR ridiculously. So
I do think it's kind of crazy how people will so drastically change what they do in training for a meet prep, when it's like if you're hitting these big numbers in training with this style and with these variations, there's no need to drastically change that for a meet because you want the same result.
So I'd say for my peaks, I'd say the biggest thing is with the squat. I peak best tapering 5 days out, having my last heavy day be 5 days out. So I've done many times where I've tried to use 7 day out strategy, and at least with the way I do it, I could probably adjust percentage of volume drop, because I volume drop by 50%. I basically have typically a 6x3 turn to a 3x3. And that works really well, basically being like 11 days out, or actually probably, like 8 days out, then 5 days out, and then like a 3x1, 3 days out, and then compete. I find that works extremely well. And like when I squatted 625 pounds in the gym, I actually remember, it's actually kind of funny that my hamstring was sore. They actually think it wasn't the same hamstring I stabbed. But it is a tricky line, because I think one of the things is as you get stronger in powerlifting, you start to have a bigger difference with how you feel recovery-wise and with your performance, and then it becomes really a matter of towing that line. Yeah. Like you can feel fantastic and just perform horribly. Like if Sean dropped his volume, like I'm sure his shoulders and elbows and even arch would probably feel really good. Just actually, would it?
No, I definitely agree with you. Where it's like the swings are huge when you're really strong. Yeah. Where it's like for a newbie, you get them feeling fresh and they have the best day of their life.
Specifically though, because that's the one part I don't know for sure with the arch.
So quick little thing. I don't do anything to make my arch bigger. I literally do nothing. So when people ask me for tips, like I just get on the bench. Like it is just naturally there. So yeah, my arch would probably feel better.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Then perfect. Yeah, so I'd say that is definitely the biggest trait with the squat. And one thing that I will say, I do actually very similar to Marcel's with the heaviest single for me is week and 5 days out, just like how he said, his is 2 weeks out. One thing that I do think people need to understand is that you can push projected 1 rep max in slightly different ways and still push it in a way that's going to be less stressful mentally. Yeah. So like for myself, I'll go for, like I said, week and 5 days out, maybe I'm squatting like 590, 575, something like that. Then 5 days out, even I'm just now starting to taper, but you still do need to push intensity, in my opinion, when you are tapering, or at least for my case, when you're tapering, fairly dramatically, 6x3 turn to 3x3. Yeah. So I'll still go for a lighter single, but then a lot of times my peak triple, be like RP 8.5, and it'll be only 5 to 10 pounds lighter than that single. Yeah. So the projected 1 rep max will still rise in different ways. Yeah. And I do think, especially nowadays, I think that's something sometimes people are scared of doing. It's kind of similar to Sean's like pause deadlifts being super strong, or his rep out work being super strong. Like it's okay to just keep pushing this really high projected 1 rep max and counting that it will convert over. And in my experience, when you are fatigued, it is the singles that get affected the most from that flatness. Yeah. So as far as the deadlift, that's definitely the one where I'm the most unique in, because I do almost always a 2x4 with around 90% of my target 1 rep max with straps, which is definitely an abnormal thing. Yeah, it is, because I do get a lot out of straps. And I have had many times where I typically do a 3x1, 3 days out or 4 days out. And I've just found, it's actually funny because a lot of times these things happen, I'm sure you guys have similar experiences, where sometimes things just happen and then they end up being really effective and you find out after the fact, like, okay, that was interesting. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the first time I pulled 300 kilograms, I remember I just skipped that 3x1 day. So I just had a really hard 5 days out deadlift, and then just skipped that, and then it was the first pull in 5 days, which to me was pretty foreign, and it worked super well. So then I just kept doing that, and then for the Arnold, when I pulled 317.5 kilos, that's exactly what I did. So I did not pull at all 3 or 4 days out, and I just trusted that. And to your guys' point, like you just have to trust it if you've seen it enough that it's going to be true. And a lot of times there are really small things that end up being the reason. Yeah. So it's like, for me personally, I think the biggest reason is hand-skin condition. Is I think if I pull even 3 days out, for myself, especially when I pulled mixed grip, now hopefully with hook grip this will change, when I pull mixed grip, I do rely on tension on the hands. So even 3x1 with 585 or 570 or something, or 550, it still taxes the hands. It still gets a little bit of that callus, just a little bit looser. And then the reason why I found this is a huge deal for me is one time I didn't deadlift for a very long time. Then I do a single, and grip was not the limiting factor at all. And I was like, wow, that's weird, because I didn't do any forearm work whatsoever. Yeah. So I figured it was just the condition of my hands. So ever since then, I've been far more careful with that. And I would actually say grip was like the limiting factor with 683, and then with 700, it wasn't. Yeah. Because of hand-skin condition. And it really took me a long time to figure that out. Yeah, as far as bench, I would say it's just basically what you guys said, honestly. Like I would say, keeping feet up bench really long is the key. Actually, after listening to you guys, I probably will, especially with Sean, I probably will entertain not cutting volume at all more, because I have been the type where I feel required to cut volume by at least like 1 set or 20%, and I definitely will consider just not at all. But certainly pushing to like a 4 rep max, 4 days out, something like that, 4 rep PR, not max. Yeah. 4 days out on comp bench was correlated, I believe, to my meet PR of like 375. So it's exactly what you guys are saying. And feet up bench 7 days out. But yeah, overall, I would just say a sample workout. I remember it was like 10 or 12 days out from the Arnold. And I did one single on bench at like 90%-ish, maybe 93%-ish. And then I did 3 by 11 feet up bench. Then I did a single with 575 on squat, 6 by 3 with 505 or 510 on low bar squat. Then I did 3 by 5 sumo deadlift and 2 by 6 wide stance snatch grip deadlift. So I did that all in the same day. And I remember the person who was in the gym was like, "Oh, so you're not doing the Arnold?" I was like, "No, I'm doing it." And that was literally, I mean, that was by far my best peak because, that's why I told 1675. And yeah, I believe I had more in the tank on that day. And it is amazing just how much pushing that edge really becomes an advantage and eventually becomes necessary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That was great. This one's a quick one to get out of the way, and then I think
let's go ahead and knock it out.
Yeah, so this one has been on a couple people's minds as a result of today, with today being what is today? Saturday, March 6th, I guess Sunday, March 7th at the time we're filming this. But anyway, Ashton and I are doing the Showdown, the WRPF Showdown in September, and people are wondering, why are you doing this? So Marcellus will be able to speak to Ashton since they are obviously coach-client, and they've spoken about this a ton. I will speak on myself in this situation. I don't have any IPF loyalty. I'm not anti-IPF per se, but I personally don't really have any crazy aspirations of competing in the IPF because the main competition in the 83 kilo weight class is in the US, where I really feel like I am, if I were to win nationals, I am conquering the pinnacle of the 83 kilo weight class, and to go to Worlds and maybe not get that same level of competition, I don't really have that burning desire to go to a world championship and tout winning it if the competition was stiffer in the United States. So for me, that is the thing there, and the reason I bring that up is, if you are to compete in one of these meets, like the Showdown or the Kern or whatever, you do receive a 1-year suspension from the IPF. So that is not something that's looming over me. That doesn't bother me at all. And another big reason for it is, I think that the great thing about USAPL Nationals is that the atmosphere is very well done. It is meant to be promotional. It's meant to be exciting. And the untested side has been doing that really well, especially in these bigger money meets. And in conjunction with that, Jawan Garrison, the 104th Avenger. If you're watching this, Jawan, what's up, dude? He is the highest level 181 at this point in time, and I want to compete against the strongest people in my weight class. I have not done a 24-hour weigh-in meet since my first ever meet, which was back in 2014, and I have not pulled on the deadlift bar since then. So I would really be curious to see where I can push my total to, especially since that concept of potentially hitting a 900 kilo total at 181 is very it's in the conversation. So that's my reasoning there. I know Marcellus could probably speak to Ashton here.
Yeah, I mean, it's very similar to Sean as far as Ashton. As far as Ashton and I are concerned, Ashton's biggest goal is always, pushing his own limits and then going where the competition is. That's it. That's the whole reason why he moved up a weight class in the first place, was because he's like, this weight class isn't as competitive. Let me go up and compete with the big boys. And for Ashton, his whole thing with, he wants to go to nationals and, of course, win nationals, but his whole purpose really with going to Worlds was to go up against Rondell, because that is his main competition. That's it. Ashton's actually in a slightly different situation than Sean, where if he were to go to Worlds, he actually would be able to have a good head-to-head battle and have some competition. But with the way things are looking right now, we have no guarantee that Worlds is even going to happen, or the Sheffield. So the way Ashton's looking at it is okay, well, the Showdown is a way where I can, go and be in a slightly different environment, being on a squat bar, deadlift bar, and compete with the best of the best, as well as the fact that Rondell may possibly be considering doing the Showdown as well. And that's what it comes down to. Ashton has the most fun enjoyment when he's lifting, when he feels like he's really challenging himself. And the Showdown is just the next step after nationals for this year anyway, in order to do that. That's really all it comes down to. Once again, same thing as Sean, Ashton's not anti-IPF or anything like that, but simply the fact that it's okay, well, if I can't go to this meet to compete against the best, I'm going to go wherever I can to do that, and right now that is the Showdown.
And he can win money.
Yeah, that's another big thing. Yeah, that's another huge thing. It's a money meet. It's why not? You get to do what you enjoy doing, go against the people you want to go against, and you can win money. There's no loss.
So I have a question. Do you guys think if you win meaningful money that you'll just be done with IPF once you get a taste of that?
Probably not. I mean, from my perspective, right? You know, I have, as my competition, Russ in the 83s. You know, that is certainly a rivalry and a battle that I'll always want to compete in. From what I know now, nationals will go back to being in October after this year. So scheduling wise, you know, I do want to continue to compete in the USAPL. It just kind of works out nicely that there is this gap where nothing's really going on in the USAPL in, you know, the end of September. So I don't think so. I mean, I'm obviously in a different scenario than Ashton where, you know, I think having a great meet, I could be top 5 despite being a tested lifter. But Ashton literally is in the situation where, like, he literally can beat everybody despite being drug-free. So,
and you guys will be getting tested at the meet, right?
Yeah, so that's actually a good point that people probably don't know, because I'm sure some of you watching this are like, oh, they're going to this untested meet. Maybe they're hopping on stuff.
Sean's got to use roids to compete with us. He sees all that mass. He's like, all right, trend time.
Yeah. So actually, we are going to be getting drug tested on the day of the meet. The directors of the Showdown have been very kind and very, like, we didn't even ask for this, just very open-minded and even making, like, the right assumptions, like, oh, we'll make sure that we can get somebody there to drug test both of you immediately post-meet so that, like, this looks clean as a whistle. You know, you guys are clearly still drug-free lifters, and we want to make sure that that's known. And I think that's really cool that they're, like, truly willing to not just merge both worlds, but, like, actually make accommodations for the people that they really have no obligation to be making accommodations to. So
it's almost like this is the effect of competition when you don't have monopolies. When you don't just have one way of doing things for everyone.
Yeah. And to answer your question, Johnny, as far as Ashton, I can't say for certain that he would be done because I do know that he still does want to do the Sheffield. Like, even if he has to, like, you know, take a year off from doing the Showdown, I know that he does still eventually want to do that. That could always change, but as of right now, I know that he does want to do that eventually. So, yeah.
Okay.
Hell yeah, brother. All right, since Johnny got omitted from that one, we do have a question for Johnny, which this is a very this is one of my favorite questions, honestly, because I definitely can empathize with this perspective or this experience. Because the question is, lots of lifters got into lifting by seeing Candito. I definitely was one who joined the USAPL because of Johnny. Who was that person for Mr. HQ himself?
Well, so if we're talking about USAPL specifically or lifting generally?
So the question wording is got into lifting.
Okay, because with lifting is very clearly my dad. Like that is definitely just cut and dry what it is. Like I was running 6-week cycles, you know, back then. As far as like Russian periodization style, it's probably would have been better off with linear progression than like percentages. But I was, in a way, it benefited me because I was used to looking at things analytically. So I'd actually say that this connects to something I have thought before. It's like for me, it really was nobody in particular outside of my family and outside of culturally just being like, yeah, of course we lift. Like my mom's met Dorian Yates and she doesn't even lift at all anymore. It's just like a normal thing. She knows who Dorian Yates is, Ronnie Coleman is, all these people. And my dad's been lifting for like 40 years, or whatever it is, since the beginning of time really. And my brother also lifted. So for myself, lifting wise, it was definitely for sports, just to lift weights. And I think it really did help that it was always something I did automatically. So, like, I remember there was a time I was playing basketball when I was, like, freshman year. I was pretty young for my class. So I was probably, 12? Is that possible? 12?
What year?
Freshman year, if you're young. Yeah,
no.
because, like,
that's, like,
probably
6th
14.
grade, yeah.
14.
Yeah.
What am I... How about that be 6th grade?
You were talking about freshman
year.
year.
13. That would be 13. It'd be 13. Because, I was definitely 17 as a senior. So 13.
So then you were maybe 13. Yeah, because 14, 15 for a freshman. So if you were young, then
but 13,
you could be 13.
Okay, that was definitely 13. Yeah. Like, I was definitely on the young. Yeah, because I was barely 18 in high school at any point. So, so it's 13. Well, you act like 6th grade or something. I was 1 year off. But okay. No, I was 13. I remember, like, at that point, actually was pretty funny. It was like our basketball coach said, like, all right, we're going to, lift weights. And he's like, some of you guys, may be able to only handle the bar or less, maybe Candito. And he literally did say, like, and like by that point, I know for sure I was the second strongest by that point because I began lifting at 12. So that was 13 then. So I've been lifting for like a year and a half then. And it was kind of cool I liked the fact that it was just something that I did for my own self. And I didn't interject, go, no, actually my bench is pretty good. I didn't say anything. I guess I always did kind of just not care what people thought. I just did what I wanted. And it was like, if anything, the tension that I had was I was a long jumper on like a D3 school who's like training smarter on every facet, in my opinion. Like I would do a lot of explosive work, and then they would excuse it going, oh, but you're training like a powerlifter. We're not trying to be powerlifters.
Yeah.
So powerlifting actually had a negative association for me my entire collegiate life. And it wasn't until everything really started taking off where it does feel cool that it's like people want to be powerlifters. It's not just something that Louis Simmons and these other crusty dinosaurs do. So overall, honestly, like I found out about powerlifting literally just Googling powerlifting as far as getting into a meet.
Yeah.
And I thought the single ply numbers were raw qualification standards. And had I not had that mistake, there's no chance I would have done it. If I knew everybody gets into Raw Nationals, I would not have done it because I was too competitive.
Yeah.
And luckily, I thought that. Then I got like second in 2011, and then in a T3 division or whatever. I got second out of 3, which is not too remarkable. But then I remember like over and over again, like people kept giving me respect for that. I was like, okay, like to me it was nothing. And then I gradually realized like I'm a lot better at lifting than long jumping. And then from there, I would say then it just really took off step by step. But yeah, I would say there really was nobody. Like, because there were guys like Vashon Perryman. Do you guys remember him at all? Vashon Perryman? You know who that is? Okay, yep. I'm old. Yeah, it's just like he was the freak. He had at one point he had the 165 deadlift record at 716. Then Nasnoff deadlifted 717. Then Nasnoff deadlifted like 880. Yeah. So yeah, there was like Perryman and a few guys like that, and that Alex Turetsky or whatever his name is, Turtinsky, who got busted for steroids, and so there were some of those, Hyduck, Josh Hyduck. There were some of those guys, but overall, I would say I didn't really have an idol, and I think that helped. Like I was not like a historian with the sport or anything like that. And I think that really helps because then you just go with the flow.
Yeah.
But what I will say quickly, though, is as far as YouTube goes, Pat Mendez is definitely an inspiration to me. Because Pat Mendez and Eric Spoto, to me, proved that lifting can be popular. The moment I saw that his ATG 880-pound squat, it's the 400 kilo. Was it?
No, it was 800.
Was it 800? Oh, yeah, it was 800. The moment I saw that beltless, sleeveless ATG squat be super popular, I was like, I do not believe that this sport can't be popular. I know it can't. You just saw it. And nobody has good quality with this.
Yeah.
And so with that, Eric Spoto, and then just Google search results being in the millions, I'm like, this can take off. And I don't need anyone to show me. Honestly, like that's how I feel. That's how I came into it.
That pre-IPO evaluation there.
yeah, exactly. Like that's why when I have a view, like I am extremely passionate by the time I'm like really committed to something. And it was one of those things where I'm like, I see everything aligning. And then obviously a lot of external effects like factors like CrossFit and stuff help along the way, big time.
Yeah.
Awesome one.
Favorite or most underrated accessories and why? And then conversely, most overrated exercises, accessory-wise.
Okay. We'll do this per body part. So I think for me, and well, let me make this clear because Johnny and I had a conversation about this earlier. I'm going to make the delineation between accessory and variation here. To me, accessory is going to be anything that's a non-barbell movement because I think we do track volume on variations kind of more one-to-one with the competition movements than we would for an accessory. So for something like a squat, a belt squat to me is probably the best as long as you have a good one. I would say a good belt squat is probably the best squat variation that you can do. So for example, like a Rogue Rhino, a Pit Shark, those are kind of my two favorites. Like I've used every belt squat. I'm probably going to make a belt squat video at some point, kind of detailing how to use it and which ones I think are the best. Obviously if you don't have a great belt squat, like a leg press or a hack squat could work well, but I really do feel like you're eliminating the axial loading of a barbell for this movement, and especially for some people built like me or built like Marcellus who are not necessarily, don't have necessarily favorable leverages for something like a squat. It eliminates that axial loading, but the pattern really is like so similar to the squat that I think it outcompetes like a hack squat or a leg press for that reasoning. For something like a bench press, I think probably I think a lot of different answers here, honestly.
Yeah.
Because for me, for bench press, it's like I don't know how to explain this other than it's like the most like obvious that if you just have more muscle, you'll lift more
weight,
on the exercise. So a feet up variation, whether it's Larson or just a genuine feet up variation, or just varying grip. Like if you are like a really wide grip bench presser, I think that within reason a closer grip could work better. But for someone who's more of a bench technician, I've really seen a lot of success with a Larson press. If you're kind of underdeveloped, then I think that like there are benefits to, just like I said, building more muscle. Where like transference of well, I guess I said that we're not doing variations here. Yeah. Let me backtrack a little bit and say, accessory wise, I don't know if I have a great answer for that because I do really think that like the best supplemental stuff are the variations. So I will say the most. I guess for upper body, any sort of, chest press machine, I will say, actually is pretty solid here because I think that when you eliminate, I'm trying to think how to word this here, but like with a dumbbell press, I've seen very poor carryover for some people and very high carryover for others. Yeah. I'm not even gonna expand upon this. I'm kind of.
Well, I'll pick up where you left off as far as that because I actually agree. I think the chest press is very underrated for just upper body when it comes to the bench press because, like you said, a lot of people, we know the barbell variations, Larson, close grip, things like that, dumbbell press, incline barbell press. But like you said, just getting in good, easy additional volume on the chest and the triceps, which is very easy to do like with the chest press machine. I've even the same way we just do like banded belt squats. I've seen even people do like banded chest press just for the same reason. For the bench press, I think, of course I do. I know I get a lot out of dumbbell pressing for my bench press, but in general, if you're doing any type of upper body pressing motion, just for additional volume, that's going to at least in the aspect of gaining muscle mass, more often than not going to help. I know, Jonnie, you're kind of an exception to that because you say you don't really get as much with doing anything outside of really bench work.
Well, you know what? The one thing I would say I have gotten a decent amount out of, but it's more movement related probably, is loaded push-ups.
Loaded push-ups?
I actually have seen some positive effects from that. And I think it's also really easy just to load up a 45 or a little bit more, or a weighted backpack. And just go to RP7.
Monolift.
Yeah, and I do think because it's a little bit more of open chain movement, things like that, I do think you can get a little bit of a different training effect range of motion wise while still having a wide grip. Yeah. Personally, I think the fixed grip of a chest press makes it to where it either works or it just doesn't.
Yeah. And I think that's the key is like kind of a side tangent, but kind of finding what works best from the standpoint of for me, I know that even if I'm doing Larson press, close grip, long pause, I can, if I'm trying to get more volume in, once again, do my range of motion, I can only do so much extra bench press work. So for me, doing dumbbell press, chest press, or even weighted dips, just something that allows me to get movement variability while still working on the pecs and the triceps.
Weighted dips are a good one.
That's out of every lift, that's probably done the most for my bench is the weighted dips. I know when, especially building my base, as my weighted dip went up, my bench definitely went up along with it. And even now, when I push that more, I see the benefits of that. So
so this is for all three lifts?
Yeah, or just in general. So tell me our most underrated movements or accessory movements.
Accessories in the
underrated
not
accessories.
Barbell.
Yeah.
Has anyone said hamstring curl? Because I would say
that's good. No,
personally,
that's good.
I would say just due to the fact that none of the powerlifting movements train knee flexion and hypertrophy just generally is useful. I think a lift like that makes a lot of sense. Now, personally, myself, I really found the benefit from seated hip adduction and hip abduction. Now, I know there definitely are a lot of specifics around that. I think you've mentioned before, Sean, to me that especially with seated abduction, you can have potentially overuse issues if you are someone who already has a lot of external rotation, things like that.
What I was going to say was that I guess if we're talking diving down a little bit of the movement science stuff, is just that with something like the abduction, I think that a lot of times people try to train the glutes with something like an abduction where, the primary function of the glutes is going to be hip extension. And I don't know necessarily how much transference I really see in a movement like that. Even the hip adduction really is something that I don't see necessarily transference. It's just that when we're talking, like you said, with overuse, it's like powerlifters tend to leverage abduction far more frequently than you would ever leverage adduction. Right, when you're squatting, you're never thinking knees in. When you're deadlifting, you're never thinking knees in. Your adductors do play the role in hip extension coming out of the bottom of the squat, which is why I think that a lot of lifters probably could benefit from like a, I don't know, you'd call it movement variability. I'd hate to say the word preventative because you can't ever be preventative, but just like, insurance work, if you would want to call it, like, just doing something extra that's
like
low.
Expanding your controllable range of motion.
Yeah,
I definitely think the start of a hip adduction lift, even just on a regular normie machine, I think just being able to control that.
Tissue resiliency.
We'll
call it that.
Yeah, I do think it's that, because you really need something that's under load to have a really meaningful effect.
Yeah.
And the fact that you can load that for even for 20s, I do think there's definitely some utility to it. And in my experience, when I did that fairly early on in my sumo pulling, I definitely saw a decrease in, I would say, adductor fatigue after the fact, because I was just over prepared. And sumo is a unique lift where it's, in a way, it's unlike the squat and obviously the bench, because since there is no eccentric and you are getting into the starting position, you're not necessarily forced in the proper position. Whereas on the squat, like let's say you sit back too much, like that will over time, in my opinion, be corrected by where your shin angle drifts, and then slowly becomes a lot easier to be like, okay, now I get it. Now I'm going to load my quads a little bit sooner. On the sumo, you see it where some people who just have a really closed off hip position, especially people who don't believe in movement variability or any or anything a little bit more nuanced as far as other than just like one view of like form doesn't matter or anything like that.
Yeah.
A lot of times, those people just have god-awful sumo deadlifts because they just read a study and they go, well, it has the same EMG in terms of erector tax, and it's no different other than a slight amount of quad use, which on paper is the case, but in practice it's not really. So I do think some of that, just being a little bit more expansive, helps you at least entertain different positions, and then you can find it. Maybe you'll be more like Sean, where he's more reaching and protracting, whereas I'm probably a little bit more extended than even I should be, but I'm definitely I have a different pattern, and in that day you won't really find that naturally on the sumo. Like I think that's why a lot of people give up on it. I think you really do need to try a lot of different things out.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. It's the importance of training your muscles, the muscles involved in the big three, through various range of motion, and strengthening those various range of motion, I think can only benefit you. I don't think there's any harm to it, and I don't, we're all obviously big on being evidence-based, but I don't even need a study to tell me that. Like we see it, we know it.
And to go one layer deeper too, I think you could also look in relation to daily activities, where you say,
yes,
how many people are just used to moving their hips through free range of motion?
Yeah.
Not many, not many at all.
Well, I've had clients who literally especially if they're sitting at a desk all day, right? Where I'll just have them be like, hey, let's do more just throughout your day, getting up, abduction, adduction, right? Even like just forms of resistance, moving around, and they feel better. They feel better when they squat, when they deadlift, versus only being in these very specific positions all day long.
Yeah.
And to me, it's the same thing. If you are going and working out, if you're only in the same positions all the time, over and over and over, I think you're just going to deal with more issues than if you have more, like I said, movement variability, strengthening the muscles, connective tissue through various range of motion.
Yeah, and then you can always sort out the bullshit from this is if you set up really with an on-paper, good-looking sumo, your hips are externally rotated, your hips are close to the bar, all of that, and then you start shifting around a lot, have instability during the lift, then you can scale back.
Yeah.
But you really can't find that point until you enable that range of
motion.
motion.
And actually play with it. Exactly.
Yeah. I want to give my last underrated, which is going to be the opposite of what Jonnie said. Not that I don't agree with what he said, but I do also think that despite powerlifting having a deadlift, which is technically a hinge, many powerlifters actually suck at hinging. So I really do like having some sort of hinge accessory, like a dumbbell RDL. Or, obviously we're talking, non-barbell, but really anything that is a pure hinge, because the thing that when it comes to maximizing, leverage and being able to maximize load on the bar, like we hinge our squats and we squat our hinges. Like that's how we end up lifting more weight on both of them. So I can't tell you how many people I've met, especially like even high level lifters, who like you get them to do an RDL and it just looks like pure garbage.
Yeah, that's totally true.
Yeah.
I think I think there is a lot of credence to some movement logic into this, and not because I do think it's dangerous when we get too compartmentalized. Because a great example is on paper, it would make complete sense for Sean to do weighted hip thrusts, but it's like how many people do loaded hip thrusts, and then they go, yeah, that's why I deadlifted 728. like other than Brett Contreras is saying that, who I do love, by the way. Yeah. It's like other than that, it's you don't really see a lot of lifters attribute that to their success, and I think it is because of the pattern issue. Because in many ways that makes sense. Like as far as training the glutes maximally, you're matching the direction of the force. It makes sense on paper completely.
Yeah.
But that movement pattern, just being super extended and with the load in front of your hips, it's not the same as staying tight in more of an RDL position, like you said.
Well, what I was going to say with something like a glute bridge, why I agree with you that I don't think it works, but the reason here is that with something like a glute bridge, you are overcoming hip extension parallel to the direction of the resistance, whereas when you are deadlifting, hip extension is perpendicular to the resistance, right? If you're standing up doing an RDL, the weight is going down in the direction of gravity and hip extension is horizontal, but with a glute bridge, those are co-parallel vectors.
Advantage. But that's what they'll claim, that's advantage. Like that's why it trains the glutes better.
Yeah.
But then it just doesn't really care.
Yeah, it's just like non-specific strength and hypertrophy.
Yeah. Definitely.
Oh, and then I guess conversely, most overrated exercise.
So with squatting, I feel like it's hard to find an overrated. I guess like if we're talking, obviously we all have different audiences. So I guess I'll speak with mine where there's a lot more people who are into like movement-based stuff. When it comes to actual transference to the big three, since this is a powerlifting Q&A, I would say anything that's like Zercher, because I think that's great for movement variability, but like you can't load it significantly, number one. Number two, the limiting factor is never going to be your legs. So it's kind of a shitty answer because I don't really have like a true overrated, but in my world, I would say Zercher anything. There's a place for it, but it's definitely not in getting your squat to go up. With bench press, overhead press sucks. It's just not. It's just a waste of time if you're worried about getting your bench to go up. And with deadlifting, I would say that for some people, maybe more notably like untrained individuals, something like a hyperextension or a good morning might be okay. But I think for many of us who have especially been lifting long enough, gotten stronger, who already do leverage like so much extension, I think you're kind of you're taking water out of the same well by doing an exercise that is going to continue to potentially feed like the overuse patterns that we don't want with minimal carryover, right? Like I think if we're looking to use an accessory to enhance our strength, we would like it to carry over in a way that it builds more tissue, in a way that it is going to increase strength while removing our I'll use the term compensatory strategy related stress. And I just think that doesn't do either. Like I don't think it carries over that well, and I think it just feeds like the same exact patterns that we're not necessarily trying to avoid on squat, but it's something that is related to overuse.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's funny because you were thinking about the squat. The Zercher squat was going to be my immediate answer, just because, especially like, and I get it because like during the shutdowns, that was something that a lot of people were doing to get some extra work in. But my thing was when gyms were opening back up, I'm seeing people in gyms still doing it. And like instead of belt squat. And I'm like, that just doesn't make sense to me because once again, like you said, the legs aren't going to be the limiting factor. I think overhead press for bench is garbage. It just doesn't make sense. Like you're going to get bigger shoulders and get better. Well, I don't even think it's necessarily the best for that, but you're going to, grow your delts and get better at overhead pressing, but it has very little carryover, I think. And I think with maybe like beginners, right, or weaker lifters, just because they're growing muscle as a whole from doing all these movements, and they might seem like, oh, my overhead press goes up, my bench goes up, but I think that's not going to last at all. And then for the deadlift, I mean, since this was movement, I think like if we're just talking accessories, then I think we said it made sense. But I'm talking about like movements in general. I think overhead is supposed to help the deadlift. I think like block pulls. I think those are a little bit
trap bar
overrated.
Yeah,
trap bar. Yeah, it's overrated too. Yeah,
I was gonna say trap bar.
Yeah, so I guess from my spirit, I don't really see people promoting that quite as much for the deadlift. So I agree, but I guess that's why it come to my mind.
Now I'll say something that I think Sean might totally disagree with.
Ooh, let's hear it.
I think lunges are super overrated. I think lunges, as far as difficulty. Now, if you're doing maybe for a movement reason, I could see it being different. But if you're talking about difficulty in relation to hypertrophy, I feel like the ratio is just god-awful. Like, a lot of people hate doing lunges, especially hate doing it to true RP7. Like, it's super hard.
Yeah.
And I personally am a big fan of single leg press for that same purpose, hypertrophy-wise. Like I said, like if it's especially with the opposite leg down to avoid the pelvic tucking too excessively early. So first of all, what do you think about it?
So I don't program lunges, not to get into too much movement science stuff, but I don't ever prescribe a split squat stepping forward. It's usually going to be back. But I rarely will do a reverse lunge either. Like I'll usually just have it be stationary in a split squat form. I think there really are few people who can really first of all, have the balance to do it in a way that is appropriately loadable. I think there really are some people who can load up a really heavy Bulgarian split squat. I can do in each hand 120-pound dumbbells for sets of 10 on Bulgarian split squats. That's not everybody. But I do generally agree with you. Yeah, absolutely. When I program something that is, a split squat, whether it's rear foot elevated, front foot elevated, that usually is for a movement reason. To give some quick little tips here, I guess, without going into too much detail, but if I do find somebody is lacking in, hip internal rotation in that what I'll call mid-propulsive stage, or phase rather, something like a front foot elevated split squat might be useful. Whereas if somebody's lacking in either early or late propulsion, meaning that they're missing some ER measurements or external rotation, something like a rear foot elevated would be useful. But yes, as general hypertrophy builders, they're hard to load. They're hard. They're hard to load heavy. They're hard for people to balance, and a lot of people just do them wrong. So
I agree completely with overhead press, especially since I can barely overhead press anything.
I really try to be not dogmatic about good and bad exercises, especially as I've aged. But overhead press is really the one where I'm just no. I just don't see any use for it whatsoever.
Yeah, and one that I'll say is that I think is teetering on the edge is deficit deadlifts. I do think deficit deadlifts are one that have been kind of phased out more and more lately, and I think it's because people have become more mindful of fatigue management. I think it's just one of those where it's it's just so rough to fit in. What Sean has said as far as, you're really fighting for extension. You also are adding in leg drive when you don't really need a ton of leg drive by that point. And I do think more of a pure hip hinge is just often more effective. A stiff leg deadlift from the floor, I think is almost always more effective, a lot easier to gauge RPE than a deficit deadlift when you're changing your starting position.
I will say I have a couple clients where the way we'll go about with them will be maybe on a secondary day, a top set of deficit deadlifts, but then their back downs will be something like RDLs, in place of it and stuff like that. But that when I say a couple, I literally mean a couple. Because with many others, it's just with most of the stuff, there's always the exceptions, right? But for most people, I would actually very much agree with that.
Yeah, because especially when it's pounding with volume, if you do 3 sets of 8 on a
Jesse
North style.
No, I've said this in a Q&A before. When it comes to, and I know this wasn't an accessory, but it's a variation. But this is a good topic to bring up. It's if I'm choosing a variation, it better be addressing a problem positionally related, which if you're on a deficit, you are genuinely, you are literally outside of the range of motion that the lift is on. You're not within it, right? It's not even a block pull where you can try to make it more similar to the competition lift at that phase of the lift. You are literally outside of the range. So position-wise, it's not at all comparable. Comp specificity wise, it's less specific, right? So if I'm going to choose something less specific, I would at least like for it, if it doesn't achieve what I just said position wise, at least like it to be less taxing, which it is not. It's just infinitely more taxing to be doing a deficit deadlift. So I'm just why would I do this if I could just do the competition movement? Or if my goal is some sort of variation that's addressing something positionally, like a pure hinge, right? Or, not necessarily a block pull, but at least I'm saying a block pull, even if you did do that, it's within the actual range of motion of the lift where you're completely extrapolating, outside of it.
Though I still don't understand what people do sumo block pulls, though, to be honest. Or
I've had some success with sumo block pulls in the right context. Yeah, because I used to genuinely miss that lockout. Everyone's it's starting position off the floor. And it's it's really not. It's literally my hamstrings were too weak at that point in the lift.
Okay. All right, guys. So we camera cut off for a second, but we are back. Johnny was saying some nonsense about why sumo block pulls are good, even though they're not. So we're just gonna So we're gonna just move on to the next point. But pretty much we went over overrated exercises, underrated exercises. So next question being, so what are some fads in the same way that there are fads among athletes, what are some fads that you guys see when it comes to coaching? For example, things such as obsessing over pelvic positioning or adductors at the same time.
I'll go first. I would say, I have the exact opposite experience. I think the biggest fad is being overly reductionist. And it's tough to call this a fad, but I would say there's definitely a trend of saying things that everyone agrees with for the sake of that.
Yeah.
So it's like, how many times do you see someone post about like, RPE is important because, on some days it just feels really heavy and blah, blah, blah. And then like they just leave it there where it's like, and it's not technically wrong, but then that'll be it. And then even in deeper discussion, it's like always defending RPE all the time because that's the in thing to use RPE all the time.
Yeah.
And I think that's just, I think the difference is you can see when some coaches give public opinions from the perspective of they actually want to help people, they're working with people, and they're critical about their own style.
Yeah.
And then they're like, okay, so I've actually done this differently on this, hook grip this way, Pete's a different way. And it's just different than giving kind of the generic answer. So like if I had to say a specific thing, it probably would be using RPE just with no other context. Would be like just 3x8 at RPE 8 and that's it. In just no other context.
Yeah.
I think that's a bit of a fad because I just don't think it's that helpful beyond a certain point. And then, like I said, I would to give a specific label now, this is not an insult to them at all, but I would say some people who just kind of parrot the barbell medicine and RTS views and then just kind of parrot it and then that's it and then just add nothing to that. And I think that a lot of times people know that that's like the quote unquote right thing to say and then don't really go into like, okay, how does this actually help people? And put it in that framing.
Yeah. I think for me, a fad that I see in coaching is like, because now it's like it's really popular to be informative, right? Like really put out information. And I think it's almost like pseudo-informative in the sense of it's a fad to like sound really intellectual, sound like you're trying to help people, but then use a bunch of rhetoric that nobody understands, or be very dogmatic with your informative content. So for example, they'll take one thing that might actually be true, like for example, we are talking about like, a stacked pelvic position or whatever, and they'll make that the end all be all. And if you bring up anything else, like, no, none of that matters. This is the only thing that matters. And that's something that I find that a lot of people are doing. I think it's because people feel like this will make me stand apart. Like if I focus on this one thing and make this kind of like my thing that I care about and focus on. But I actually think it's very limiting because the only people who are going to be drawn to you or clients are going to be drawn to you are clients where they already have a bias towards that type of stuff. So you limit who all you can work with. And then even with the people who do come to you, you limit how much you can help them because you're limiting the amount of tools you have available to you. And mind you, I'm all about having like, a specific structure or style that you like, that's fine. But when it's just like, hey, this is it, there's nothing else that matters, I think that's a problem.
Yeah, I would say the biggest fad in coaching is that there are too many of you, and a lot of people shouldn't be coaching. But to expand more upon that, I think that there really is so much information out there, and one of the biggest problems that I see, and it's when you've been coaching long enough, you can tell when people are doing it, is that people will see something promoted on social media and it just immediately becomes part of their tool belt. It's like, oh, how did you coincidentally started doing this when a week ago you didn't. And I think that the biggest issue with that is when you truly don't know why you're doing things. Recency becomes relevancy for you. It's like you've seen something recently and then now this becomes the most important thing for people to be doing and you just misapply it. Like, with the example in the question of like stacked pelvis and adductors. It's like I see people use the phrase like ribs down, like that became very quickly like a fucking buzzword. And people either just like misapply it or just like I've seen people say like, oh, I'm doing a good job keeping my ribs down, and then they like crunch over and then it's like as soon as they initiate their squat they just do this, and I'm like, you don't know what you're saying. Just like please admit that you just don't know what you're talking about and just leave it there. Like that is easily the biggest problem that I see. It's like people have an abundance of information, and in order to, like Marcella said, set themselves apart, it's like they'll just pick and try to integrate it into their model, but it's not really an integration to their model. It's just like, I don't have a model, so I'm just whatever I can pick and choose from this marketplace of information, I'm just gonna put forward.
And it's not there's anything wrong with like new information or like finding something that you found, hey, I'm going to try this out and it works out for you or your athletes, but it's like you have to have a base like of something. Like you have to have some type of consistency. If you're constantly changing what you're doing just based upon what's popular, then you were letting like basically the realm of social media have way more control over your athletes than what you do.
Yeah.
And that's just ridiculous at that point.
Yeah. Sorry to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
No, the you know, on the opposite side of what Jonnie said about being overly dogmatic and reductionist, it's like definitely in my circle I see people like misapplying a lot of like the movement science stuff where it's just like, you know, oh, this person has this 90-90 hemi bridge, and just like, okay, why are you doing that?
Yeah.
Or like just not understanding that certain things need to be loaded, or just like completely misunderstanding things in general, where it's like I'll see someone doing something for somebody that is meant to promote, you know, more hip internal rotation, and they're lacking external rotation, or they just never even evaluated that person. Like most people, I'll see programming certain restorative movements, if you will, or just accessories, and they don't even have like table test measurements. It's like, how do you know someone was even missing that in the first place? Like, why are you even wasting their time with this? They might not even need it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's just a specific example there, but the general problem is it's too easy for people to pretend like they know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
I think that's what it comes down to too, is like, do you really care about learning? And if you do, they're just so that you should always feel like there's so much information to learn that we literally don't have the time to.
Yeah.
Because I remember even when hurting my hamstring, it's like just the fact that the type of hamstring injury and in the location, and you know, like ballerinas' hamstring injuries have just a drastically different recovery time.
Yeah.
I found than someone who's more in mid range.
Yeah.
Yours was distal.
Huh?
Yours was distal. Was it by the knee?
Yeah. It
Okay.
was. Yeah. So I think that contributes to being faster recovery time, right? Would you say? Versus if it was higher up.
I actually really don't know the answer.
Yeah, so there was a researcher I was following, like from Norway, and he was posting things like that. It's just very fascinating. It's like, because there are some things where it's like, this is why you can't just say like, okay, I saw barbell medicine, and this is not even their view. I'm sure they have a lot of specific information. It really isn't. Like, don't smile at me like this. Like, they really do have specific information.
Yeah.
But like there are certain cases where it's like, if you don't get a hamstring surgery, it's like you actually do have worse outcomes. Like there are points, obviously, that should be obvious, where that's the case, but just realistically, it's very unlikely. And most people need to hear, just don't do it. Just don't get the surgery. Like Sean and I talked to a guy who showed us his L5. There are pictures of it like taken out. Whereas like you gave that a week. You need to give that more time.
Yeah.
But there's so many individual piece of information, like even with beltless work, where it's like even when Greg Knuckles posted about beltless squats, like what we all know now, that it just has decreased intra-abdominal pressure. Mm-hmm. And he basically made a very compelling argument that even for general strength, you should basically always wear a belt. But for beltless deadlifts, that wasn't necessarily the case. For beltless deadlifts, in that same set of studies he was listing, there actually were some notable differences, and there wasn't a clear downside in terms of quote unquote core activation.
Yeah.
So if you're training for a deadlift, it's like that is something to keep in mind in the back of your mind. And you have to actually read those studies. And I think the weakness is when people just actually don't read the studies, just give the blanket answer. Because those blanket answers are generally true.
Yeah.
And if you have no way of assessing it, you won't know how wrong you are. You won't know what you're missing.
Yeah, no, it's pretending to care instead of actually caring.
Yeah.
That's really what it comes down to. Is like, I'm sorry, like if you care about, powerlifting, fitness, training, if you actually care about your clients, you're going to want to learn more. Mm-hmm. You're going to take the time to make sure that you're not just putting stuff out there just to be fancy or for a fad. You're going to actually, put in the time and put in the work. And I think the problem is a lot of people get into coaching for like, they want the benefits of what they think comes with being a coach, but they don't actually care.
Yeah.
I really do think it's that simple.
And I do think one thing that is a trademark to coaches who are not onto fads is like, we'll learn a lot of things that we don't talk about.
Yeah.
Like like I'm sure we've all read like a caffeine meta-analysis that we just never post about.
Yeah.
Or what I've talked off camera about is like when we talked about tapering, is like central nervous system fatigue is kind of a meme at this point, at least in the way that people used to think about it.
Yeah.
As far as singles, being more taxing, since it's actually higher rep sets and more endurance training, it is harder on your central nervous system. And then you can just have that in the back of your mind, and maybe you don't even do anything with it. Like, you just don't do anything with it. But then all of a sudden it starts making sense mechanistically why later peaks work better, combined with muscle protein synthesis being 24 to 72 hours.
Yeah.
So it just all comes together, and then you're like, okay, now it starts to make sense, and then you can kind of piece it together. Obviously, within reason, you don't want the post hoc fallacy to get too crazy. Yeah. But, but it's just stuff like that, where it's like you're just constantly in it, and then you have layers that don't necessarily need to be right away pushed out and just sold. You know?
Yeah, and it's really tough because there are people, obviously there are levels to how much you care, but
sure,
there are people who do care about, coaching and wanting to be a coach, but like with the abundance of information, it is so easy to get half the answer to anything.
Yeah.
Where it's like, in a time with less information, to get anything, any knowledge about anything, you would have to go all in the way that Jonnie's describing that people who really care do. But it is really just so easy to like open your Instagram and find half the answer to anything, and you can just run with that and be like, oh, this is good enough, right? Like I don't need to do much more, right? Like I have the general premise, but it's like if you look at an answer key for an exam, if you're studying for an exam and you look at an answer key to a past exam you're using as a practice, and after the fact you're like, oh yeah, I could have rationalized that, and then you go into the exam and you just get destroyed. It's the same thing. It's like you can't actually synthesize; you're just able to backwards rationalize.
Yeah. And I really think the key to emphasize this, like if you're listening to this and you're not sure if that's what's up and what's down or where to go, because I think a lot of people just don't really know where to go, since experts by definition know more than us. I think it just comes down to the assessment. You have to have a way of finding out if that's not true.
Yeah.
So if someone's constantly saying it's like brace 360 degrees and brace harder, and your coach is always telling you brace harder, and you never feel like you're bracing hard enough, that's bullshit. Because then there's no end metric. Like and not everything needs to be numbers, but there's no end point to see like, is this working? Is this not working? Is this working? Is it not? And like I said with Sean, like his deadlift being a little bit more protracted and all that. It's like if he tried that and he just kept missing that lockout, then he wouldn't do it. It would be that simple. So there has to be some sort of end point, not just a principle all the time.
Yeah. It has to. You have to be able to apply what you're learning,
and test if it's wrong. Because there's some things that we try and we're like, okay, something more specific does need to be done there. Like Sean with his movement prep, like he could just say like, hey, pain science says I don't need to do this. But it's like if it consistently feels worse and reflects in performance and he has trends long term, then he can do it, and then like we talked about off camera, then pull back, when it's not needed.
Yeah.
But it needs to be reactive to something.
Yeah. You good on that point?
Yeah, man.
All right. Next question. Do you guys have different philosophies in programming? If so, what are they? So Jonnie, you want to take this one? Because I know you differ from Sean and I with this one. Yeah, you're the special one.
Yeah, I have like two main points. So the first one that I know I'm not going to convince anyone on here is the fact that I have deadlift variations where I just straight up linear load that variation. Like kind of old school, like probably something I would imagine like Kaylor Williams done before, where it's like you just have a deadlift wave where you're doing conventional deadlifts and you have 3x5s linearly loaded starting at very fast bar speed, and just push up to 5 rep max in between cycles. With myself, it'd traditionally be with the wide stance snatch grip deadlift, aka the Candito deadlift. aka. But and so that one is definitely just like my style as far as I would say the way I train deadlifts is definitely very momentum based as far as like really aggressive waves. So, like a 3 to 4 week wave of that, then a 3 to 4 week wave of, maybe pause deadlifts, then a 3 to 4 week wave of a competition peak. So almost somewhat conjugate-ish, while the squat is definitely always, traditionally trained, in my perspective, on like singles and all that year round. But then as far as specifics with percentage backoffs versus RPE, this is something where, to me, I've just never done percentage backoffs after an RPE top set. I've always found it very intuitive to start with RPE on both the top set and the backoffs. I actually find it's easier to judge RPE on those backoffs since it is lower height. And so it'd start with, let's say, RPE 8.5, top set of 7. Let's say a single at RPE 6, top set 7 at RPE 8.5, and then 2x7 with the second set at RPE 7. And then in future cycles, add weight in relation to those slots. So let's say plus 10 pounds. If I overshot that, then on the backoff work, only plus 5 pounds with RP 7.5 cap. And then if I have to, move down from there. Whereas, these guys use percentage drops, which I think is stupid.
To give some context to this, I guess, not necessarily dichotomy, because I wouldn't say they're on opposite ends of the spectrum, but just the difference. I think not the one reason, but I think a reason it works really well for Jonnie is that Jonnie has always been Jonnie. Jonnie has always self-coached, very objective, just personally, right? So it's very easy for someone like him to judge RPE across all rep ranges. One, out of objectivity. Two, out of just tons of historical data.
Yes.
And being able to make these like across block decisions.
Yeah.
It's just relying on, predictability.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like he has the...
And lifestyle too. Like, I definitely think if I had like a more hectic job, that definitely would change.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, it definitely makes sense. And like, I don't think there's anything wrong with that strategy at all.
No,
I think it's basically what I'm going to say here is that like with Jonnie's knowledge of himself, I think that even though he doesn't go after a certain percentage, I think that he's probably very close to, or rather, the numbers that he ends up picking line up with probably, plus or minus 2%, 2.5% of what like a percentage back off would end up being.
Yeah.
So somebody programming a percentage back off with the goal in mind of it being within a certain RP range. Like it's like one is going in the opposite order of the other, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I don't exclusively program percentage back downs. Like I think there are certain lifters who do better with ascending sets. I think there are certain lifters who do really well with like more RPE strictly.
Yeah.
Some lifters who really do better with percentage backoffs who are either just like overzealous lifters who tend to overshoot a lot, where it's just like you can give them that hard cap of, all right, like I'm not leaving any room for interpretation for you. You're just doing what's written, and it's very clear when you rebel against that. Yeah. Or there are some lifters who really like need a significant drop off after a top set, where it's like it does get more muddy telling somebody to be like, oh yeah, I want you to do an RP 3 or 4, especially as the rep ranges start to climb, where it's like, do I really know how to judge a set of 7 at RP 3 or 4? Probably not.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like if you do give them a more aggressive percentage back down, that really fixes them to a number that they might not come upon as quickly, and then it's like if you scale that across weeks, if they made the wrong decision early, it's like maybe we could be missing out on some progress if they're continuing to, maybe they're making the right incremental choices, but they just started from such a bad initial point.
And experience level goes along with it a lot too, because it's like, one, I feel way more comfortable with like, let's say a less experienced lifter, giving them percentage drops, or giving like, okay, we're going to work off percent, hit RP based top set, then percent of your 1 rep max, because I know that if I'm between, say, anywhere from like 70 to 80% of the 1 rep max, I can pretty much predict what type of fatigue we're going to get with that. Whereas if it's somebody like Ashton, where it's like, hey, we're going to just do this top set and then like 70 to 80% of your 1 rep max, right? That's objective load is just going to impact him differently than somebody, say, like a 400-pound max squatter. So I feel more comfortable giving somebody more of that like RPE based type back down work. As I know they're more experienced, they come to know their body, and I'm seeing that they're making the right mature decisions with those top sets, so I can then trust it with the back downs as well. And then a lot of it just depends on what I'm trying to control variable wise, right? Like I said, it's if on there, let's say you have a top set and then we start around 70% and we end around 76% at the end of the block. Then going to the next block, we scale back a little bit, start around 72%. So I know we're going to end at 78%. So that way, if there's fluctuations with their top sets based upon how they're feeling, I'm ensuring that we're getting that progression week to week. And then if I'm doing a percentage drop, same thing, as long as they're being relatively true to that RP. And like you said, Jonnie, for you pretty much know your schedule. You have full control over that. Whereas me, like, if I have clients who are like officers, nurses, in the military, things like that, it just allows me to control those variables of recovery a lot better. And it also ensures that, because sometimes you can feel more beat up than you actually are, right? So if I give you like this RPE range, you might scale it back more than what you actually need to when, hey, we could actually get a little bit more workload. So I'm going to give you an assigned percentage drop to ensure that we get that, but it's still within the RPE that we need it to be.
I will emphasize here in closing on this point is that I do think, honestly, probably the biggest factor with this is how much someone rounds to the most convenient weight. Because it's like it's very intuitive to me for if I'm doing like when I was even training with Sean, where I give had a range. It's like in just adding going from 415 to 425 on sets of 7. Yeah, where it's like that is a decision. I know there are a lot of lifters who will literally never do that. It will be 405 or 455. Yeah, and that's it. Yeah, and sometimes lifters are much better than me, still do not make nuanced decisions, and I think that does affect their programming a lot.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, I've definitely seen some of so I have. For those of you watching, I have coaches who work under me, and one of my coaches, Jaron, is working with this lifter who, like, young lifter, probably less likely to make a decision like this, like, made it a point to, like, at any juncture where it made sense to make this decision would load like those odd plate numbers where it's just like gross when you're training with pounds or kilos and you're putting on like a white, black, silver, and it's just like, oh, this is like a weird weight. But it's like I've seen so many lifters where they either are getting, worse results out of their program because they are, let's say if it's like just straight RPE, they end up just truly doing something too heavy when the intention is not to, like, if you had a 3x8 at like 8, right? It's like if you try to repeat that weight for the next 2 sets, a lifter who is not understanding that they can drop the weight might just be overdoing it on those back downs. And conversely, you might see the lifters who just purely get prescribed RPE and they're in a situation like Jonnie said where it's like, oh, I have 8s today, I'm doing 4 or 5. Like, that's just the 8s weight. Like, I remember I made a YouTube video on not even my current channel. I started like a YouTube channel like years ago. And I remember saying in the video, I was like, yeah, I kind of have this mental thing where like, if I have 5s, I have 8s, doesn't matter what it is, I'm loading 405. And it's just like I recognized that back then, and there are a ton of people who will do that.
The Jesse Norris syndrome. It's like, oh, I'm doing 585 on a big day, 495 on a light day.
Yeah.
It's like,
but I think what we all acknowledge is that, a mixture of these things,
Sorry, Jesse.
He's not watching my channel. Yeah, there's no way. We're good.
He just had a kid.
Yeah, so he's got no time to be an hour and 15 minutes into this.
Don't send this.
But if so, Jesse, welcome to the channel. No,
if so, Jesse, prove us wrong. Come back. We think you can't do it.
But yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think we all agree like a mixture of like, RP, percentage drops, and then, communicating with your client as far as their circumstances and what you expect for them with the programming is going to be best, obviously.
All right, guys.
Last question, yeah.
Let's go.
Do you believe powerlifting has evolved for the best or taken a step back these last years?
Last years.
How
many years?
It just says these last years.
You pick. How many years? How many years are we talking?
Oh, let's go with the past 3 years.
3 years?
Yeah, just
recent.
Yeah, recent. Yeah, keep it kind of recent, yeah.
When was the camera ban?
Yeah. No, seriously. Let's say
exactly 3 years ago.
Yeah, right. No, let's say.
I need the IRS. I need some IRS data before I get to this. Yeah, they're gonna have no idea what the hell I'm talking about. But yeah, we'll see.
But honestly, for me, whether I say the past 3, 5, 10 years, I think it's gotten better as a whole. Like, collectively, I really do. I think, there's certain things that we might have issues with, maybe with specific federations in Johnny's case. But seriously, I feel like as a whole, kind of, not so much contradicting, but in contrast to the point we were making before where there's this saturation of information, I do think it's good that there is just generally way more information now. There is way more informative coaches out there. There is a higher standard, I would say, even though it needs to still, be raised, a higher standard for what a coach is now compared to what a coach was back then, where it's just this dude who coached football and is also now a powerlifting coach. Yeah. And just like the resources we have, I mean, my channel, your guys' channel, all these things that add into it, and just the amount of people that are getting involved in powerlifting, the diversity of it, I think.
Diversity.
Yeah. No, I really do think I can't see how you can feel like it's getting worse. And I understand certain trends of like, social media is doing this and people are clout chasing, and I get all that, but I feel like a lot of people hyper focus on those negative things so often to where they just completely overlook all the progress that we've made.
Yeah, social media. What were you gonna say?
No, what I was gonna say is that, like Marcella said, like we can pick individual things with regards to powerlifting in the most recent years that we just hate about it. But I'm going to think about this very systematically, and I'm going to think, okay, how do we categorize qualities of powerlifting and how they've changed over the years, and then just net gain or net loss. And off the top of my head, I have level of competition, amount of money to be made, membership, promotion and reach, and quality of information. And like in my mind, no matter how many little things I could pick out, literally every single one of those, and I'm sure there are many more categories you could come up with if you think about it, they've all gone up. Like it's just indisputable that all of those facets of the sport have just grown tremendously in a positive direction. So
this year alone, dude, you've got now primetime sessions at local meets. Yeah. I think that alone is awesome. Like that's something that we were not really doing that even just a year or 2 years ago. Like how it's been being done in the past 2020 and now.
Yeah, I think anytime talent rises and there are more people, it's like has to fundamentally be the goal. Like that's the whole point of what we're doing. And it's like ultimately, I do think people who imply it's gotten worse are really just trying to hold on and control. And it's like, that's the thing. It's like, maybe it's gotten worse for you.
Yeah.
Those are good. Yeah. Like
these kids and their social media.
Yeah. It's like, social media is making, powerlifting definitely better. Maybe the world a little bit worse, but powerlifting. Yeah. I would also say, even to my point about reductionism, it's like, in the end of the day, we used to be in the era where, like, Kelly Starrett was, like, the thing. Mm-hmm. And he's shit, so... That's what I said. So it's like, if someone's a little bit too much into, like, nothing matters, and let's say generalizing pain science is still better than, like... Remember when it's like, you have to squat their knees forward, you have to just... force those knees out no matter what. Yeah. And I remember even one of his recommendations was like to stand on a bar stool, so one leg's up, one leg's down, like really oddly, really like controlling and posture all the time. Like I told Jeff Nippard personally that his video on posture is like unbelievably helpful. And I know I'm drifting a little bit away from powerlifting here, but to bring it back, it's very similar because it's like all of these rules that were imposed, it's easy to take for granted just the freedom it gives people, and it's like, no, you can control a lot of these variables this way. It's not Marcellus Training Systems behind a paywall. Yeah. It's like, here's how you do it. Here's how you do it. It's not even, with Sean being a super high level lifter, maybe the only thing behind, like that's a little hidden is his weight cutting strategies, which I try to get out of.
I mean, even then, not really.
Yeah, he's pretty open with it.
Yeah. So it's like a lot of these specifics are really getting out there, and I just think it's incredibly helpful. And I do think the one reason why people feel this is because I do think there's going to be a struggle for regional, tribal belonging. Yeah. And I think that is something that powerlifting has yet to address. Yeah. I do think people should feel strong. If you're the strongest in your state, you should feel strong. And right now I do think a lot of people who are the strongest in the entire state that they live in feel weak because they see just how strong the game's getting. Yeah. And I do think that needs to be addressed a little bit. Yeah. Where at least there are more clear levels, like track and field, which, I've said before.
Yeah. I guess we cut off again, but John's pretty much done at this point. But yeah, so as a whole, we collectively agree that powerlifting has definitely just gotten better. Despite a few things that we may want to improve or think we can work on, as a whole, we think it's collectively just gotten a lot better. Do you guys have any more thoughts on that, or is that about?
Yeah, I think I agree with that. We didn't mention that lifetime memberships are stupid, just to reiterate it, but it is done. I do think there's going to be... The only thing we really didn't emphasize is I think there's going to be more competition for the future of powerlifting, and I do think that's going to be very interesting. I think it will be good for the sport as long as it's not tied to just one or two sponsors that then get to dictate things. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that is the main thing with powerlifting, is as long as it's what's best for the lifter, and the only way you're going to get what's best for the lifter is for more companies than just SBD. Yeah. But that's just flat out the reality. Yeah. And hopefully that happens. And I do think we're headed towards a great direction. And I'm excited to see Sean at Showdown make some money. Yeah. You'll do well.
And I'll make a nice $500. Cover my flight. and drug tests.
Yeah. Any closing thoughts, Sean, on that?
No, I mean, on the Showdown, you mean?
No, just this topic, yeah.
No, lifetime memberships, Sean? Have you even said anything on that?
Bad idea. Don't buy it.
Yeah, that's about it. Cool. Marcel, do you have any?
No, man. That's it, man. First of all, thank you. We appreciate all of you for asking questions that you did. This is easily the longest video that I've ever done on my channel. So for those of you who actually made it to the end, we appreciate you guys. But yeah, I think that is pretty much it for the video. Want to thank Jonnie and Sean for both coming on. Appreciate you guys. But yeah, that's it for the video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, go like wow, I just butchered that.
Yeah, no, you good.
Yeah, it doesn't matter, man. I'm tired.
No one's watching anyways.
No, if you guys enjoyed the video, go ahead and leave a comment down below. Let me know what you did. If you did not enjoy the video, leave a comment down below.
Leave a comment if you got to this point. How about that?
Yeah, honestly, yeah. Like if you actually finished.
Timestamp this point.
If you're here, hashtag blueberry.
Okay.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. Hashtag blueberry. Yeah. What was I saying? Oh yeah, leave a comment down below if you enjoyed the video. If you didn't enjoy the video, leave a comment down below.
Mm-hmm. Subscribe to this man.
Subscribe to me. Subscribe to Jonnie. Subscribe to Sean. Keep it simple, specific, scientific. We'll catch you guys later.